Noton grimaced. His aim was off by a good 2 meters, but he quickly swung the targeting reticule in line as it burned bright gold across his HUD. He grinned wickedly and pulled the triggers, managing pinpoint accuracy despite the machine's relative motions. Twin cerulean beams flashed, gouging white-hot furrows and sloughed off armor and blobs of already cooling slag. The autocannons followed, vomiting metal toward the target, chewing into the already damaged right leg. Recoil and the rapidly dropping battle mech attempted to walk the streams up the victor's leg, but Noton kept his aim on track, savaging the last of the limb's armor and sinking deep into the mech's shin. Secondary flashes of bright light spawned from additional internal damage within the blackened cavity. When the barren, rocky planet of Talon was discovered, it raised little fervor. It lacked the water and biological prerequisites for colonization, and it was overshadowed by its system sibling Wernke, which proved to be a prime location for agriculture and settlement. Surveys were taken, but for many years Talon sat idle. It wasn't until someone searched through those geological surveys that a true value for Talon was revealed. The rare earth metal deposits were sizable and proved so rich that the little rocky planet that no one cared about was suddenly prime real estate. Kalen Weapon Industries, or Kalen Industries as they're later known, was first to capitalize upon the opportunity. Instead of setting up a mining operation to ship the minerals off-world, the company's leadership decided it was more economical to simply build their industrial facilities and factory lines on Talon. Water, food, and other needed supplies could be imported at lower cost than exporting massive amounts of mineral ore. These production lines would go on to make popular and influential battlemech designs like the Enforcer, Griffin, and Jägermech, as well as the Partisan heavy tank, which quickly gained a reputation for reliability and solid construction. However, their first battlemech would end up being their most famous. The RFL-3N Rifleman had a tremendous impact on the battlefields of the Succession Wars and would see service across the Inner Sphere and beyond. First designed and constructed for purchase by the SLDF, or Star League Defense Force, in 2505, the Rifleman was envisioned as a fire support battlemech that could fit multiple sub-roles as a long-distance fighter of ground targets, as well as containing the fire control systems necessary to target aerospace assets accurately. The earliest prototypes and production had the usual issues of bugs, and even at the time, the 1 and the 2N versions of the mech were identified as too light, too prone to overheating for efficient use of its weaponry, and the extremely light armor made Mechwarriors wary of wandering into a fight. And battlefield commanders, of course, were hesitant to commit the mech, lest it be quickly targeted first by enemy forces. As a result, the Rifleman 3N that was eventually being produced by 2770 was actually an iterative design that contained better heat sinks and more efficient weaponry. Weighing in at 60 tons, the Rifleman was an imposing presence on the battlefield. The Kalen Type 4 steel structure and Pitman 240 fusion engine provided the rigidity and power needed to field an impressive array of weaponry. Opportunity cost is always going to be in play here, as the 65.8 km/h top speed is not going to be winning any drag racing trophies, but it did get the mech where it needed to be. Eventually. The 7.5 tons of Kalen Royal Star armor were a significant issue for the Rifleman, especially as the collapse of the Star League and brutal First Succession War ended up pressing the mech into service outside of its intended role as fire support. With only 120 points of armor protection, the Rifleman could not survive under sustained fire from even light mechs. For comparison, the C1 Catapult, another fire support battlemech, had 10 tons of armor, which provided 160 points of protection. The Ostal, another 60-ton design, was protected with 9 tons of armor, which offered 144 points of protection. The one thing that the Rifleman 3N wasn't short on was weaponry. Each of the battlemech's arms contained a Magma Mark III large laser and an Imperator A AC-5 autocannon. For backup at short range, a pair of Magna Mark II medium lasers were split between the left and right torsos. While this is an impressive loadout, it comes with a couple of rather significant asterisks. The first is the 10 single heat sinks on the Rifleman 3N struggled to deal with the heat generated during a battle. Firing even just the 2 large lasers together leaves you 6 heat into the red for the turn when stationary. More often than not, one of the large lasers had to remain idle in order for the Rifleman's Mechwarrior to avoid cooking in their cockpit. Thankfully, firing both autocannons and just one of the large lasers leaves you heat neutral for the turn. But that brings us to our other asterisk. The original 3N Rifleman only carried 1 ton of AC-5 ammunition, in the center torso of all places. At least you won't really have to worry about ammunition explosions, because with only 10 rounds of ammunition, you're going to be going through them quickly. Once you're out, you're left with a battle mech that has 4 lasers and a heat deficit that makes using more than just a couple of them at a time a significant issue. But even with its drawbacks, the Rifleman 3N benefited from several advantages. The first was its usefulness in its primary role as a fire support mech. The second was that there were a lot of them produced. With Kalen Industries located within the Federated Suns territory, it made sense that the Davions would end up with a large number of riflemen in their AFFS. As the story was told, Hans Davion was personally a fan of the battle mech design, and this led to additional sales to the state's armed forces. At 60 tons, the Rifleman was considered a heavy battle mech. Most modern pilots also considered it a death trap. It had a decent punch, particularly at intermediate ranges, and its 2 big Imperator autocannons provided highly desirable long-range, low-heat firepower. But it had the worst vices of both heavy and medium mechs. A medium armor mated to a heavy speed. That made it a support weapon, like an old-style self-propelled gun. It couldn't survive in a furball. Caballero as she was, Avenging Annie had gotten the most out of her little sure shot in more than a score of battles. When used for its intended purpose, the Rifleman performed well. Though, as we previously mentioned, the succession wars often strained supply lines and reinforcements were not often available. Pressed into action, it was not unheard of to see riflemen on the front lines out of sheer necessity. In 3021, an updated variant of the Rifleman designated the 4D was spotted among the forces of the Federated Suns. In a shocking move for the Davions, the 2 AC-5 autocannons were removed and replaced with a pair of particle projection cannons, and the addition of more heat sinks, bringing the total to 15. Unfortunately, even with the additional cooling capability, the Rifleman 4D was plagued by overheating issues. Firing both PPCs at the same time left the mech 5 into the red on the heat scale, and the problem only intensified with either of the large lasers were added to the mix. Even a savvy Mechwarrior was left with the frustrating proposition of being able to use only roughly half of his or her weaponry at a time, lest they drive the mech into possible shutdown. The Rifleman 3C debuted in 3026, reflecting an attempt to do away with the heat issue by pulling out the 2 large lasers and upgrading the AC-5s to AC-10s. While this largely solved the overheating issue, the 2 tons of ammunition again left the Rifleman with only 10 shots per autocannon. Once the ammo ran out, the 3C is left with only 2 medium lasers to keep itself alive until ammo resupply can arrive. While the concentrated 10 damage per shot is nice, every shot has to count or the Rifleman 3C is not going to pay for itself on the battlefield. The first significant upgrade to the Rifleman is also our Helm Memory Core variant. Debuting in 3049, it's the first time we see the use of double heat sinks on the mech that was crying out for them. It was produced by Kalen Industries on Thermopylae on order from the Free Worlds League. The biggest and most expensive change for the Rifleman 5M was the installation of a Hermes 240 XL engine. While I'm normally wary of the Intersphere XL engine, I'm gonna forgive it for the Rifleman here because if you're already taking fire, your problems are many, and the standard engine likely isn't going to make much of a difference. 12 double heat sinks provided a big increase in cooling, and thankfully an extra ton of armor was added to the mech's hull. 8.5 tons still isn't the bee's knees, but it's at least going in the right direction. The 2 large lasers from the original 3N are thankfully left as they are. I know it must have been a Herculean effort on behalf of the devs to resist the temptation to slap ER large lasers on it like every other Helm Memory Core upgrade. The 2 medium lasers were also left in their original locations as well. The big weapons change was a swap from the AC-5 autocannons to the Ultra AC-5 variety. Unfortunately, the major drawback which wasn't addressed from the 3N was the ammo limitation on the autocannons. There was still only 1 ton of ammunition for both guns. The issue was actually further compounded if the Mechwarrior chose to double fire them. If going all out and doing so every turn, the ammunition bin was drained in less than a minute. Though there were some interesting variants down on the timeline, the Rifleman 5M feels like the first time the mech can really take advantage of its weaponry and present a serious threat to its enemies. Much in the same way that the Exterminator's stats didn't quite fit the lore until much later in the timeline when the technology caught up. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait until the 32nd century to see the Rifleman come out into its own. The 5M is a decent mech that fixes one serious flaw, slightly addresses the impact of another, and completely ignores a third. Overall, it's worth taking out for a spin. The Rifleman was waiting for him, its remaining 3 guns brought to bear on the Dragoon's fighter. Blackwell, lost in his fury, bore straight in. His craft's armor was vaporized by the hellish energy of the mech's lasers and his pounding of its autocannon shells. He didn't care. Flight after flight of missiles roared out from the Holly LRM launcher beneath his cockpit. His aim was poor, and most of the shots went wild, streaking past the battle mech or striking the ground beside it. Some burrowed into the heavy plating of the crashed dropship to send scraps pattering harmlessly against the mech and the scorched dirt around it. Some few others found their target, repaying the battle mech some of the punishment it was dishing out. If you're not a big fan of the autocannons, fear not, because just a year later in 3050, there would be a second bite at the Helm memory core apple, with the Rifleman 5D. By this point, the battle mech was being manufactured at several different locations within the Inner Sphere, and the 5D is one of those offshoot development paths which once again attempts to play with particle projection cannons. Our 5D variant has 17 double heat sinks, which is quite impressive for our 60-ton friend. As it turned out, they would be needed, as the two primary weapons are a pair of PPCs split between the left and right arms. They are paired with the two large lasers that we all know and love at this point, and finally the tried and true medium lasers are once again there in the side torsos. If you're looking for a rifleman that can provide some more sustained fire over the course of a long battle or campaign, this is likely going to be a more attractive choice than the 5M. It'll still run hot if you fire the PPCs along with any other lasers, but the two large laser and one PPC option might be preferable once you're within the large laser range. Now we're going to leap ahead in the timeline a bit, because the Rifleman C makes me a sad frog, and I hate it for making me feel human emotions. As with other videos covering mechs with a truckload of variants, we're really only going to hit the highlights and perhaps a couple of silly ones along the way. The Rifleman 6X was another Kalen upgrade to the mech, which had been a solid performer for hundreds of years. Once again, it was given an XL engine, but this time it was large enough to push that top speed up to 86 km per hour. That 5.8 movement profile is interesting for a mech normally not expected to travel anywhere quickly. It was also given a big armor increase up to 11.5 tons. 10 double heat sinks would also keep the mech cool, as it has a ballistics heavy loadout. Two LB-10X autocannons were split between the arms, and they were joined by a pair of ER medium lasers. The tried and true medium lasers of previous variants were finally retired and were replaced with a couple of ER small lasers. Thankfully, the 6X has 2 tons of ammunition for each of the LB-10Xs, so you're not going to be running out of ammo in all but the longest of engagements. Being able to swap from solid shot to cluster rounds is of course a big plus for the LB-10X. If you're looking for a solid ballistics rifleman that can wade into battle and stand good odds of surviving, the Rifleman 6X may be the variant for you. The Rifleman's autocannon vomited out a salvo of shells amid a gout of flame, but the projectiles flew over the Wolfhound's head. The large laser slung beneath the autocannon on that same arm drilled its infernal beam into the Wolfhound's right leg. Armor boiled and evaporated beneath its hellish touch. When the Kalen Industries production lines came under dispute in 3063 in fighting between the loyalist 22nd Avalon Hussars and the 7th FedCom RTC in the midst of the FedCom Civil War, logistics chains were strained. Kalen leadership sought to make use of the materials they had to keep as much production running as possible. One of those solutions involved taking the Rifleman chassis and the rotary AC-5 autocannons from the Jägermech JM7V. The resulting Frankenstein's monster of a mech was given the designation RFL-8D. In order to fit the large autocannons onto the mech with sufficient ammunition, a new endosteel frame was used along with a 240 XL fusion engine. 12 tons of armor provided the 8D with great protection, and 11 double heatsinks keep the mech cool. The twin rotary AC-5s can send quite a bit of ordnance downrange, so it's good they have 3 tons of ammunition apiece to draw from. A couple of ER medium lasers provide the only other protection. Oh, did I mention it had jump jets? 4 tons worth pushed the movement profile up to a 464, which makes me happy because we all appreciate a jumping rifleman. Eventually, the Rifleman 8D would see action in both sides of the FedCom Civil War, and in the years since has filtered out across the Inner Sphere. The damage from the twin RAC-5s is attractive on this versatile version of the battle mech. Now we're just going to cover 2 more official variants and a special one after that, though there are roughly a dozen more. The next is a 3133 late Dark Age, early IlClan era Kalen Industries and Oriente Weapon Works Rifleman 7N2. It has all the modern bells and whistles like endosteel, the 240 XL fusion engine, and 10 double heat sinks, but also benefits from 11 tons of armor and case 2 to protect the ammo contained within the mech's soft and juicy interior. The Garrett T11A comm system and Garrett D2J targeting and tracking system remains from the original Rifleman. The two primary weapons are a pair of LB-10X autocannons, which are tried and true quality producers by the 32nd century. Backing them up are two light PPCs, a relatively new, smaller version of the legendary particle projection cannon that can reach out to 18 hexes for 5 damage per shot. Finally, an ER medium laser is added to each side torso to round out the build. The LB-10X and the light PPCs pair well as they share range brackets. The versatility of the LB-10X is well known, and it doesn't let down here either. The 7N2 can run a little warm if you're firing the light PPCs and the autocannons each turn, while also running or tossing in the ER medium lasers for good effect. If the machine has a downside, it's that there are only 3 tons of LB-10X ammunition instead of 4. It's not the end of the world if each autocannon could fire 15 times, but if you're going cluster and solid shot mix, you could run into some ammo issues where you need one or the other to finish off your prey. The Rifleman 7N2 is a solid machine. It retains the anti-aircraft targeting quirk, improved communication system, searchlight, ubiquitous quirks. They're all fun if you're playing with those advanced rules. Our last official general variant in this video is the third clan attempt to make a Rifleman C in 3132. While previous attempts were less than stellar, the Rifleman C3 is an effective killer. Produced on Twycross by Trellshire Heavy Industries, the Rifleman C3 is clearly intended to fill that original role of fire support, though likely in a second line or garrison unit. It does benefit from endosteel and 9.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor, though interestingly, the engine is the original 240 Pitman Fusion variety and not an XL. Both the comm system and the targeting and tracking systems are the same from the original design. In the nod to the original 3N Rifleman, the C3 carries 2 Clan Tech Ultra AC5 autocannons and 2 ER large lasers split between the left and right arms. Backing the primary weapons up are 2 ER medium lasers split between the left and right torsos. This loadout is supported by 14 double heat sinks, which can easily handle the heat generated by shots from the autocannons and the 2 ER large lasers simultaneously. It's a very logical and solid clan refit of the original Rifleman. It's just a little sad that it took till 3132 to get one. Now, I don't think we can do a video on the Rifleman without talking about Gray Noten, one of the most famous Mechwarriors to ever pilot the BattleMech. Achieving his fame as a BattleMech gladiator on Solaris 7, Noten knew both how to fight and how to make it entertaining for the audience to watch. Noten and his refit Rifleman, known as the Legend Killer, was often put up against heavier opponents, and still, more often than not, Noten would end up taking the victory. He managed to hold on to his championship title for 7 years running. Both Mech and Mechwarrior were seen so often together in advertising and holovids that the term a legend killer was frequently applied to both of them. But what was so special about this Rifleman? I'll preface this with a note that says there are at least 2 known versions of the legend killer Rifleman. We're going to go with the one that I think is the most effective if you wanted to use it in your own tabletop game. Even though there were rumors swirling concerning secret SLDF technology being concealed within the patchwork armor of Noten's Rifleman, the truth is a little bit more mundane. Pulling the 2 large lasers from the mech opened up enough weight for 4 jump jets, additional armor, and an 11th heatsink. This new movement profile of 464 leaned into Noten's aggressive and agile fighting style. With 12.5 tons of armor, the Legend Killer was no longer a frail fire support mech. The 11th heatsink allowed for the mech to jump its full 4 hexes and alpha strike consistently. While the overall DPS of the mech was technically down without those large lasers, the 3N never really could make use of the large lasers to full effect anyway. The final result was a mech that was hard to pin down and could consistently put fire on target. The one serious downside was the lack of ammunition for the autocannons, which remained just a single ton. Then again, if you're Gray Noten, you only needed enough ammunition to win the match, which was usually less than the full 20. If you're like me and appreciate a mech with jump jets, the Legend Killer 2 might be a good option if you're looking for a Succession Wars Rifleman. Since the record sheet can be a little hard to track down, I recreated it in Megamech for you. The PDF is in the video notes below. Davis McCall's Rifleman stepped from the jungle as the Slayers raced side by side across the mudflats and out over the sea. His mech's arms were already raised, the autocannons spitting fire as empty, smoking shell casings flipped onto the sand. The flash and flicker of explosions chewing along the starboard side of one of the fighters made it lurch heavily to one side. Now before we wrap things up, I think we need a Mech Frog variant of the Rifleman, and I bet you can sort out what I would think it was lacking from the official options. Behold the Rifleman 1 MF in all of its glory. It rocks the 460 classic movement profile but benefits from a light fusion engine, endosteel, and 10.5 tons of light ferrofibrous armor. 11 double heat sinks will keep the mech alive, though true to Rifleman form, the MF can be a hot one. The goal for the weapons loadout was to create a mid to short range brawler that can serve in frontline formations. 2 plasma rifles split between the left and right arm are the primary damage dealers, but they are backed up with 2 light AC-5s in their traditional arm autocannon positions. These 2 weapons work together well as they share the same range profile out to 15 hexes. For closer range or panic firing, there are 2 ER medium lasers, one on each side torso. When normally operating, the 11 double heat sinks are able to handle firing the 4 primary weapons. However, if you bring the ER mediums into play, I hope you are in your ice blue underwear. With 20 shots for each plasma rifle and the light autocannons, you don't have to worry about running out of ammo in a single engagement. If you have, things are likely either going really well or the ammo won't matter anyway. The Rifleman 1 MF would be a great way to introduce your opponent to having to add a combined 4d6 heat to his or her mech at the end of a turn in addition to the normal 10 damage per rifle. So why do we love the Rifleman? It's one of those classic BattleTech battle mechs which really shouldn't be as beloved as it is if you just look at the record sheet. It benefited from being in the first grouping of classic 3025 TRO mechs, as well as showing up in books like the Grey Death Legion series, where it tended to do better than it should thanks to the presence of a supporting character in the cockpit. I suspect there's also a more primal connection with seeing really big weapons on a machine. It might not be super practical or even a logical choice when there are other more capable fire support mechs out there, but there's something about the Rifleman which commands respect and admiration. What's not to love about it? Do you have a favorite Rifleman variant or a story to tell of the Rifleman that just refused to die on the battlefield? Share it in the comments and we'll keep the discussion going. Thank you as always for coming out today to talk some BattleTech. Don't forget to hit the like button and even subscribe to the channel so that I can slouch in my chair and watch the number on the screen slowly go up. It's mostly painless. So until we meet again, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.